we're intentionally applying fire by management activities based on some conditions that we've kind of set, and really with the aim of trying to meet a land management goal or a natural resource objective. And so in and of itself, right there with a prescribed burn is, what are those conditions? And so that really leads into making sure that we document or think ahead, and so making sure that we identify what are those things or those conditions we need to have outlined. And so that really leads into why prescribed burn is important. With the other goal of being prioritizing safety and efficiency. And so having a game plan is going to help us be safe about it, be efficient with its use. Not only that, but having a burn plan is actually beneficial because one is we have a next generation of burners that we want to educate, and how has that been used? And so how did grandpa or dad do those? How have they always used a northwest wind or those kind of conditions? Another great opportunity is maybe it's someone that's wanting to learn how to burn. And you can actually efficiently communicate that objective, that method, the sequence to that person. And hopefully at the end of the day, that's your neighbor, that there's a chance to burn together. And so that's a good way to communicate to a neighbor, whether they're helping or not, but that's a great way to try to help communicate. Why are we doing this? What are we going to do that your neighbor feels safe as well?
Individuals that have worked with NRCS, for example, in the past have developed conservation plans on grazing lands, and some of those ingredients would be practices, which prescribed burning would be one of those. If they have that, is that kind of the driving force behind the need of better understanding the use of prescribed burning, understanding that target or that goal, but then developing a plan?
Yeah, you're right. So the conservation plan, that's really from our agency standpoint and our planning assistance, that's what really drives. That gives us the authority to be out there implementing any kind of practice on the landscape, and specifically when burning is really laying out that design. And so we have individuals that have job approval, that have that experience and training, that should be able to go out there and provide that assistance. Some local offices may not have that directly, but they have access to it. Not only in NRCS, but there's also partners such as KGLC that really have that opportunity to provide that assistance on behalf of NRCS. And so that really is kind of that overarching drive is, we're going to use that for that purpose. That conservation plan is that that land management objective. Here's what fire is going to do as part of that overall system.
We know that in the past that NRCS has developed prescribed burn plans. Individuals that have the right job approval authority or the ability to design and to actually help a producer in that design process of developing that prescribed burn plan. We also know that contractors like the Kansas Grazing Land Coalition and contractors that also have that experience and that approval can develop and design burn plans for producers. But producers that have been burning for years and have great experience on the landscape of implementing and applying prescribed fire or prescribed burning on the landscape could also develop a client-produced prescribed burn plan. How do you see that, or what would be the difference maybe in a producer-developed prescribed burn plan, the process?
Yeah, I think probably one of the most challenging, or probably a lot of it's up here. And so it's some of it just a matter of getting it on some paper, would be one of the things, as far as it's probably a lot more hand-drawn type of maps, but there's a lot of public access to ways to draw on maps and aerial maps and things like that. So I think it's probably the documentation piece, but we'd really just love to capitalize on that knowledge, skill, and ability that the client already has. Is, if they've done that safely, what may it be is if we have a certain objective to accomplish, it may be just like I said, kind of tweaking that to where, is there a certain wind direction or ignition pattern that may get us just a little more intensity in that. And so it may not be just this overall writing or, revamping the entire plan. It's how can we, tweak one piece of it. Or maybe it's something that we just haven't considered the smoke impacts as much on one of our more, producer developed ones. And so, hey, let's just take a quick look at that. And are we having some of those impacts? And could we be a little bit better from that standpoint? So I think that's what I see is I think there's maybe bits and maybe components that we might just take a little closer look at. But again, a lot of that skill and ability, just capitalize on that, help them document it, and make sure, like I said, let's just check those boxes and feel like we can do it safely and efficiently.
So as long as they get the ingredients of what that burn plan has in it, a producer could develop that. And if they need assistance, there's help out there to finalize and make sure that those boxes are checked.
And we're not the main driver. I mean, you look at any extension publication in the Great Plains and those things, I mean, those ingredients are listed in most of those extension publications when you're talking about fire, and a lot of those entities and other partners and agencies that help with fire across the landscape. Those are some key ingredients we'll find in and amongst the majority of those plans.
If I do have a prescribed burn plan, what are the requirements or what are the ingredients of a prescribed burn plan?
As an agency, we have some specific criteria, and And we want to have that best laid plan, but sometimes we forget to check a box, and so it's always nice to kind of have some of these themes in our mind. Obviously, the first one is that kind of leading back to is an objective. What are we really going to try to accomplish in that landscape? And whether that's a natural resource objective, something else with livestock performance, but let's identify that, and that's going to kind of ripple into the burn area and the description of what's going on there. That might be some of the fuel loads. It's going to be smoke and what the smoke can impact around us. What are some natural fire breaks that I could actually use, in that landscape? Another bucket we kind of jump into is, once I have a description of that area, is kind of preparation. What neighbors might be impacted by this? What are some communications I need to? What are the local authorities? Are there some different things? Each county can be different, so making sure I check in with them. What are some maybe fire breaks I need to construct so that I can make that a safe and efficient burn? And so those are some of the things that we think of when I kind of let's prepare and get ready for. Along with that is actually then identifying some of those weather parameters. What are those conditions that I need to use to really, what wind direction, humidities, those kind of things. Then we jump into kind of the implementation side of it. So let's start getting a crew together. What kind of equipment do I need to use? Pumpers, sprayers, ignition torches, things like that. And then how do I actually lay it out on the landscape? And really a map's probably the best, piece of that prescribed burn plan that says, we're going to start in this downwind location. We're going to actually establish these burn fire breaks and then close it in. Included in that, of course, is mop-up. That's part of that implementation plan as well. And then the final piece is kind of the idea of how do we do? In other words, that kind of post-burn assessment. And that's really going to go, so did we have a spot fire? Was that direction of the wind? Did we have trouble containing it? And it might even be 60 or 90 days later that we say, hey, did we get that objective? Are we seeing some things in the vegetation community that changed because of us implementing that prescribed fire?
In this development of a prescribed burn plan that really kind of outlines why, the purpose, the goals, and the individuals that may be required to implement that prescribed burn plan, how important is it for somebody to be able to pick up a written plan or a plan that's been developed and know exactly how that plan is going to be implemented?
Well, I think it's really important, especially if you're part of a crew, or again, it's outlining the different things. What we also know is that there's probably no burn plan that perfectly gets implemented, just because things can change on the ground. And I think that's one of the things that's so beneficial in the fire culture in Kansas is we have a lot of producers in the landscape that have been implementing fire for years. And they have those skills and abilities and the knowledge. And sometimes it's just a matter of maybe it's tweaking that timing a little bit. Maybe it's just getting a little bit more fuel loading. If they're not quite meeting that management objective. I think those are some things that we can kind of fine tune. Some of those entities have always burnt together. Right. They know what the other one's doing. It's just like, if you're on a basketball team or something else, when that pass is going to show up.
Right.
When you're burning with others, and so I really think it's with this next generation, those individuals that coming on, is how can we, or prescribed burn associations.
Yeah.
Another great opportunity, that how do we communicate that so people that haven't, we haven't always worked alongside, but we want them to join that group. Then that's a great way to really, communicate that.
In your opinion, who needs a prescribed burn plan?
Everybody needs a plan. If you're going to light fire in the landscape, I think it needs a plan. Probably one of the things is if some individual knows that property, knows those boundaries, and that crew knows that, is it always written down? Maybe not so much, but I think there's always a chance to look at the weather, look at those things that are going to drive that fire behavior, and especially and most importantly is that safety factor. And so I think that's one of the things that really highlights as far as needing that prescribed burn plan.
If a producer develops a prescribed burn plan and maybe they seek assistance from a contractor from NRCS, does that plan then, or should that plan then be reviewed and approved by someone that then could take that to an NRCS office, let's say, and say, here's my burn plan. It's been reviewed, it's been checked and seen by other eyes. Does that help in the implementation as far as NRCS is concerned for getting that practice not only recognized, but then approved for the reason that it was actually put in the conservation plan to begin with?
Yeah, I think one of the big key is you've got a local conservationist you've been working with, if you've got that conservation plan. And so that being the driver in how that is whatever's the most efficient way to get that designed, and especially ahead of time. If we've got that in a plan, as hopefully we've been thinking about it 6 months to a year in advance. We may have had to change some grazing pattern or something to really build the fuel loads or prepare, and so we should be thinking about that about that well in advance of that. And so yeah, the sooner that gets developed, and planned. Even internally as an agency, as we always wanted a second person laying eyes on that, because just sometimes you don't catch something. Sometimes another planner can catch something that, those little fire escapes that happen might have been preventable. Let's just take a look at that plan and try to limit that as much as we can. And especially from that, a client supplied one, is they've burnt that probably a couple of times, may have, may not. But if they have, is they can share that experience, that, okay, well this time, and those might be some questions to ask, is was there an instance that you had a little trouble with that fire, or something didn't go as well, and just maybe trying to include that in this next plan, going, okay, we can improve that. And so not only more eyes on it, but fire return interval is going to be huge in these. And so each time we burn that, we're going to have a lot better idea of how that's going to act, what we can do.
Very good.
I think the main thing I want to make sure of is you're not just requesting just a burn plan.
Right.
And so if you're coming in and wanting our assistance, it's looking at that landscape and then that objective where fire fits into it. And I think that's probably the main thing that just, in the past, we've had different situations where maybe a contractor that just contract burning has come in and said, hey, well, NRCS will write you a plan. Just making sure it's in that context, and we won't do it in a day or two. There's those planning procedures that we go through, and that's why really being efficient about ahead of time. Because if we write a plan outside of a conservation plan, we're kind of outside of our authority to be doing that.
Sure. The ideal situation would be that if a producer has developed a conservation plan, if you will, on grazing lands, and maybe specifically rangeland in this situation, and in that conservation plan, prescribed burning is mentioned or is recommended as a management practice, and with a goal and objective in that conservation plan. So if that's the case, and then a producer would like assistance in the development of that, or they want NRCS, or they want to be able to develop this prescribed burn plan, what are some of the channels that they could go through, or the process to get that prescribed burn plan developed as a part of that conservation plan?
Yeah, so in that conservation plan is that hopefully there's been great communication with that local planner that either developed that plan locally, and so working with them and saying, hey, I need this assistance. If that's not available locally, then there are ways that designated conservationist can reach out and say, okay, these are the entities, the partners, those individuals that can provide that type of assistance. And then the big part of that would be then as meeting on that landscape, is let's start getting that description, that burn area. Let's start talking about the equipment they may have on hand or what may be needed, thinking about those things. And so that's really the biggest step from that standpoint, is being willing, let's meet on the landscape and cover those things. I would say the discussion and just being able to visually think about how that fire is going to act on the landscape is so critical. We just take those things we discussed and, okay, here's how we're going to kind of mitigate it in some situations. If we think there's kind of a more challenging location, or yeah, for sure, this is the direction of wind, and or the use of the head fire here, backfire there, kind of thing. Okay. So work with that designated conservationist, reach out, and they'll get you put in contact with who can provide that assistance.
Okay. So if a producer is interested in getting additional assistance with the development of a prescribed burn plan, they can go to the NRCS office. That would probably be a good first contact. From that point of contact, then NRCS may be able to direct them to either being able to develop that plan, contacting a contractor who might be able to do it, or even assisting a producer to know what steps they would have to take to develop a client-produced prescribed burn plan. One of the things that KGLC has as a goal over the next 3 years is to set up producer meetings and go over those ingredients of a prescribed burn plan as a part of a conservation plan, but also just to talk about how to develop that, the reasons why, all the different steps and the reasons why we would use prescribed fire, and really go through that with a producer. Any other thoughts that you might have as far as a producer, if they're just thinking about fire for the first time, what would be your first response to them?
Yeah, I think it is. Reach out to that local office. There's extension entities. There's a lot of stuff online, and I think you can find some of that information out there. And so find a person that's experienced in it. And so the other thing I would recommend is if there's a prescribed burn association, ask, is there one in your area? And maybe try to get hooked up with them and look at those. So I think there's a lot of resources out there. Take the opportunities at those education locations or events to learn a little bit more.
So stay tuned for additional information related to workshops that KGLC will sponsor over the next 3 years that will really be targeted towards producers in the development of a prescribed burn plan, the reasons why, how to apply it, and how to implement it in a way that leaves you with a good outcome and a good goal reached.